Hi, my name is Dr. Joyce Alberts. I'm a clinical psychologist based in North Canterbury, which is in the South Island of New Zealand. I work in private practice, and I have got a heavy heart as something has been weighing on my mind for many, many years. I'm going to title this as an introduction video. It's a bit of an experiment for me as I'm using the Zoom platform so that I can share documents and web pages, as I'm familiar with doing that on Zoom. And I want to see how this works if I upload the video into YouTube. I realized that I've done a couple of practice runs, and my logo here, which says Dr. Alberts at the headway, will be reversed because for some reason it's just going to reverse it. That is what it is. I am not a professional. I'm not a professional YouTuber. I'm not even thinking about that or looking to that. What I'm wanting to do is get some information out there. And I'm realizing and recognizing that myself and a lot of other people are looking to other sources of information other than mainstream media. Um, I personally watch quite a few of the law tubers, attorney Melanie Little, for example, and her wonderful team of cupcakes. I also watch someone like Emily D. Baker, who's also a qualified lawyer, who breaks down criminal cases and aspects of the law. It's information. It's not sensationalist. It's not entertainment. It is information. There's many others that I would watch too. Some are entertaining, some are funny, but I'm looking for information. So I started to think, because this has been weighing on my mind for so long, what can I do? So let me give you a little bit of a background. So on the 28th, 29th, and 30th of June, here in New Zealand on TV3 and TV3 Now, a documentary, a three-part documentary, was played to New Zealand viewers. And the documentary was titled Devotion, the Gloriavale story. Myself and I'm sure many others watched it, but a lot of people I've spoken to had a similar response that I did. I was shocked. I was dismayed. I was upset. I cried. I got angry. I got angry. It is my personal opinion. This documentary was biased towards the leadership of Gloriavale, and it was misleading. And the information it presented and the way it presented information and misled the viewer has the very real potential that it could even recruit more people to join this community. Presented as if people living in this community have a wonderful life, that they have so many choices, so many options, and there's so much progress that's been made for this group. It's my personal opinion that this essentially was a marketing project, a way to put out information that would encourage people to consider that this is a good organization, a good system, a Christian community where families flourish, where children flourish, where people, so many options and choices. And I'm afraid that the evidence just isn't there to support that. As a clinical psychologist, constructs such as credibility, validity, reliability, accuracy, uh, corroboration, that I get information from multiple sources. And if there's outliers, I want to try to work out why is there an outlier? What's going on there? So those constructs are really important. They're fundamental for the work that I do, not just working individually with people in a therapeutic sense, but especially when I'm providing information to assist a legal decision, which is a big part of the work I do. So over the years, I've grown increasingly concerned about this group. So in this introduction video, Um, I want to talk about my personal experience with the founder of the now known Gloriavale Christian Community. And I'm going to put Christian in air quotes there because I think that that itself is very misleading. Um, so my family moved, so let me give you an introduction. So yeah, my personal experience with Neville Cooper, who passed away in 2018, and he had changed his name to Hopeful Christian. So I personally met Neville Cooper, and I'll explain the background to that. So my family moved to North Canterbury in 1985, and it was sometime after that, maybe the late 1980s, but certainly not past 1991. It would have been maybe 87, 88. I was part of a playgroup, as you did back in the day, and how it came about, I do not know why we did this. I do not know, but we did. We went on a day trip to the Cuss community. They were known in this area as the Cooperites. So we loaded up our cars with our babies and our toddlers, and we toddled ourselves off to Cust. We had permission to go. We were invited onto the property. We met with Neville Cooper and his then wife Gloria. However, we had no interaction with anyone other than Neville Cooper. We were not given a tour of the property or the facilities. We did not get to interact with any other of the families, the women, the children, the men, other than Neville Cooper. If you can imagine the scene, I mean, I drive past the property on my way to Oxford, and so I drove past it, excuse me, many times. And when I look out and see the large grass area outside one of the main buildings, yeah, I'm reminded of that day. So if you can picture this, a group of mums with our children sitting on blankets or rugs that were put out on the grass for us to have a picnic. And if you can imagine, just get a picture, an image in your head of mat time, like at kindergarten or primary school, where the teacher's sitting on the chair and all the children are sitting on the mat. And the teacher's talking to the children, and there'll be some interaction, but that's literally what it was. Neville Cooper and his then wife Gloria sitting on chairs, facing us as a group. And yeah, it was interesting. So let me just give you some more background information. Now, this is information that you can find easily both on the Gloriavale Christian Community's own website. There are other websites that you may want to look up. So there is a trust called the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust. They have a website. They have information and documents that you might find helpful and useful there. There's also different news articles that have been put onto different news sites. One that I often would go to would be the Stuff website, which is from the Christchurch Press. So they have many articles. You can search there. There's also One News, which is another website. There's Radio New Zealand, where even if it's a radio program, they have a website, and there's news. Excuse me. There's news items and articles there. So back to Neville Cooper. So Neville Cooper originated from Queensland, Australia. He had a private pilot's license. He was involved in evangelism and in ministry, and he was flying with his then wife Gloria and a number of other adults, and the plane crashed. No one was majorly injured. There were minor injuries, scratches, bruises. I'm sure they might have been a bit sore. But Neville Cooper believed that this accident was a miracle, they survived. And it was that he survived and he was unharmed, and him and his wife in particular, for a specific purpose. And that purpose was for Neville Cooper to start his own church. So Neville Cooper had tried to do this in Australia, and his vision, as I understand it, and I'm open to be corrected, his vision was that he would be the head of this church. This church would teach, and people would believe what he believed. And his beliefs were based on what's often referred to as Old Testament fundamentalist beliefs and teachings. And so he wasn't able to find that group that would accept him or join with him so that he could establish this church. So he travelled to the North Island of New Zealand, and tried again, fell out with different groups, and people were just maybe alarmed, I don't know, maybe just completely disagreed, but he wasn't able to establish it there. So he landed in Rangiora, North Canterbury, close to where I currently live. And he met a group of people who were open to his teachings and his beliefs, and were agreeable that he would start this church and they would join with him. So that began in Rangiora, and it was approximately around 1969, the late 60s, when they decided, well, when I say they, so this is coming from Neville Cooper, and I need to be really clear on that. It is my belief, based on everything I've read, everything I've seen and heard, and my own interaction with Neville Cooper, that this is completely his idea, and others agreed to it. You might hear me use the phrase immunity, because it has become very, very important to people living within this group. And you can imagine a large group of people, many families, children, unity and being of one mind would understandably be important. But this was unity, especially, and being in one mind with Neville Cooper. So they purchased a property, and at a conference I attended, they did display the purchase document, and it was purchased from one of Neville Cooper's son-in-laws and his wife. And that document said it was for the purpose of this purchase of the property was for Neville Cooper and his wife and children to live there. And quite obviously that was not the intention. It was going to be for this group, this community that was established. So the people also sold their homes or transferred their assets into the establishing group there at this property in Cust. So Springbank, if you were travelling from Rangiora towards Cust, Springbank is just at the top of the hill, immediately before you sort of enter into Cust. So some people say Cust, I often use them interchangeably. So technically it is Springbank, but people often just lump it in with Cust. So people moved on into the property, and over time, large buildings were established. There was a large dormitory block, two-story dormitory block, which once they left that property and went to the west coast of the South Highland, that property was sold, and that building has been used for different purposes. Accommodation, conference centre didn't really work. It looks a bit derelict now, but pretty much it's still there, looking just as it did back in the day. You might find some videos, some news stories, you might see photographs, or clips of what it was like at the time, back in the 80s and early 90s, and it doesn't look much difference today. So they founded, Neville Cooper founded this group. People moved into the property. They established quite a range of small businesses, light engineering, mechanical repair, farm machinery, right through to interior painting and decorating. In fact, when we lived in Kaipoi at the time, so this is back in the 80s, um, one of our neighbours had the people from cast, so they became known as the Cooperites. Um, and our neighbours had them come and redecorate the entire home, which they did in 24 hours. So they worked through the night. They had big floodlights set up. There was, I don't know how many men, maybe, I don't know, 20. Men and boys were doing the work. There were a group of women and girls who had set up tables and were providing the food and sustenance while the men worked. So literally this house, the three-bedroom house was decorated, the entire house, within 24 hours, so overnight. So they're big fans and everything for drying the paint, etc. And one of the concerns back in those days, so the 80s through to the early 90s, was the impact that this group was having on the economy of North Canterbury. So it was really difficult for other small businesses to be able to compete with the services that the Cooperites were able to provide. So it's been well documented. There's been court cases about this. They did not pay the members wages. So when they would do outside work, they were charging for tools, materials, equipment, but they weren't charging for labour. Obviously, they were making a profit on what they were doing, but of course, they could undercut any other small business. No other painter decorator would be able to even come near decorating a house within 24 hours. And I did see it afterwards, and it certainly was not a high-end quality finish, as you can imagine, drying off paint so that you could paint another layer, and doing that with big fans. Generally speaking, not the way professional painters and decorators would operate. But it was done quickly and done really cheaply. So other businesses in North Canterbury were really struggling at times to compete with the services and the businesses that the Cooperites were able to provide. The Cooperites at that time were out and about in the community. On the documentary, you will hear and see that they would travel into Christchurch, the centre of Christchurch, which is fondly referred to as the square. It's where the damaged cathedral is still located. And that was, as you can imagine, the square, like the town square, where people would go to meet. And quite often there would be evangelical preachers. The iconic Christchurch wizard would often be there speaking his stuff, what he believed, sometimes getting into debates with people and some of the evangelical preachers. People would walk through this area, and it was a common place, especially on Friday. I have fond memories of this as a child myself, going into Christchurch, sitting on the big steps outside the cathedral and just listening and watching everything that was going on. There was just people having their lunch and going around talking, and there'd be one person standing on a ladder or a soapbox doing their stuff there, and someone else debating and sometimes challenging. And the Cooperites would go in there and talk to people and essentially were recruiting people to join them. And if you watch that documentary, you will see that there were a number of tourists, people travelling around New Zealand who made contact with the Cooperites at the time, and then became part of that group. So all of that was going on. So back to my personal experience. So very aware of the Cooperites. If you saw the women, they weren't dressed in the what's become known now as the famous long blue dress with a white collar and the white scarf, but they were dressed in a similar way. They would have a scarf to cover the hair, and that scarf would be sometimes a solid pale color, not a like a dark or a vibrant color. Often sort of more the muted pastels, often with small floral prints. shirt I'm wearing today, often a blouse or a top, sort of similar to this, and that it's loose, it's not form fitted. Again, very small print and a long school skirt, full length skirt, so all the way down to the top of the shoes, so not just below the knee. It was full length. I do not really recall whether I saw the woman wear dresses. It seemed to be more often not a blouse similar to what I'm wearing and a long skirt. I remember coming across, I'd gone with my children, and possibly a couple of sisters. We had children around the same age or friends. And we'd gone to like a zoo where there's a petting zoo, and you could purchase a small bag of feed which you could give to the deer or the animals in that petting area. And I saw a group of couple of mums, clearly from the Cooperites or Gloriavale, and with their children, lots of children. And I went to approach them as I thought, well, I've got a spare bag, and their children didn't have anything to feed the animals, and they could see that all the other children were. So I thought it might be nice if I offered it to them. But as I approached, the woman sort of gathered up the children and herded them away. So obviously they did not want to interact with me, and I respected that and walked away and left them to it. But it sort of does sit in my mind as to what was that all about. You know, I'm a mum with children, you're a mum with children, but there definitely was what I can only describe as a fear response to move their children away. They did not want me interacting with their children or with themselves. So there's that. So back to our playgroup day trip to Cust. So we're sitting on the grass on our blankets with having had our picnic lunch, being talked to by Neville Cooper. So Gloria is silent. She doesn't interact with us. She doesn't say a word. It's Neville who's doing the talking. And I'm sort of using my hands that way because I remember that's how they're sitting. So Gloria was sitting. So if I'm facing her, she was on my right, and Neville was sitting on my left. So directly in front of us. And we were invited to ask questions, and Neville Cooper had been telling us about, you know, what life was like. And I remember that he brought up about childbirth, and that all of the women, I'm going to stress, all of the women were having their children at home. They were all home births, meaning in the community, in the dormitories, that they did not go to hospital. They did not require hospital or even midwife at that time. And that was part of their belief. So I asked a question. I asked at what stage, at what point would a woman be able to go to hospital should she require medical intervention or medical assistance during childbirth. And at the time in Rangiora, well, it's still there now, but we have a maternity centre there. So there is a hospital where a woman can give birth, and it was a very homely hospital. I remember spending a night there myself after the birth of one of our children, and it was lovely. It was like having a room in a sunroom, and it really did feel like a home. It was not, if you like, a traditional hospital there, and you could have a water birth there, which was back in the 80s. I mean, that was really out there, but that was quite radical. There certainly were options, and it was not a hospital or maternity centre that was sort of fully clinical with doctors per se, but skilled nurses and midwives, and obviously access to doctor. If need be, women would be transferred from the Rangiora Maternity Centre into the Christchurch Women's Hospital if they needed more medical assessment. So I was trying to understand what the thinking was, and that we had this beautiful, it was a building very similar to a wooden building, 2 stories, building very similar in the way it looked to the building in the Cust community. So I asked my question, at what point, what stage would a woman be able to go to hospital, to Rangiora Hospital, to the maternity centre if she needed medical assistance. And the answer I was given was that woman did not require medical assistance or intervention during childbirth if she was a godly woman and if she had good faith, if her faith was strong enough. It wouldn't be required. It wasn't necessary. So, disclosure here, I myself am a Christian, still attend church, I still believe, read my Bible. So I was like, well, also disclosure, I myself had to have cesarean sections, C-sections. Physiologically, was not able to have a natural birth. It was just not going to happen. X-rays confirmed this. It was not going to happen. It would not happen. I would risk my life as well as the life of a child. So I pushed back and said, well, there are circumstances in which a woman is just not physiologically able to have a natural birth, to have a home birth, that she would require medical intervention, and gave the example of needing a C-section for that purpose. And again, the pushback was no, that was not correct. So I'm not being given it. This information wasn't being presented to me, or simply this is what we believe, and this is our experience. It was stated as a fact. It is not correct that women need or require medical intervention. It's because women are ungodly and their faith is not strong enough. And if they were a Christian woman, a modest woman walking in faith, as the woman of Gloriavale, the Cooperites at that time were, and as their women were, they could have home births just like their woman, because that is the mark of a good Christian woman with a strong faith. So I pushed back again, and I just couldn't help myself. Those who know me will understand that. I won't be surprised. And I said to Neville Cooper, I said, well, I'm a Christian woman. Physiologically impossible to have children. I have, and I had at that time two cesarean sections, and knew that if I had any more children, they would be delivered by a C-section. So Neville Cooper looks me in the eye and he says to me, a visitor, someone he doesn't know, someone who's just asking information, and he tells me straight to my face, it's not his belief, but he tells me as a statement of fact that my faith was obviously not strong enough. I was obviously not enough of a godly woman walking in faith, because if I had more faith and more trust, I would have a natural birth. Okay. I remember being shocked. Obviously didn't agree. I wasn't offended because I just knew he was blatantly wrong. Didn't accept what he said. But I was shocked. My shock was the vehemence of it, and that it's not presented, well, this is what we believe, or this is what I believe, or this has been our experience. It's stated as a fact. Okay. So that was, as I said, late 80s. It certainly wasn't in the 90s, because that's when I had third child, and I remember I only had the two, and I only had the two cesareans at that time. So I'm going to share something with you. Okay. Let me see. Just get the right page up. Here we go. So you see me turn to the side like this. I'm looking at my other screen. And hopefully now you can see that I have opened the Gloriavale Christian Community website. I've clicked on the practices page, and I'm going to scroll down to where it talks about family life. So this is where they're talking about how they run things in Gloriavale. Okay, this is the section I want to read to you. And this is part of where I'm forming my current opinions, because back in the 80s, websites and web pages, they were just not a thing. So this wasn't available in this format back at that time. But I just want you to hear this. Home births are important events with more than 30 babies born per year. Not sure why it references in Australia, but it says in Australia, in the 1950s and 60s, when few midwives or doctors, actually now I know where it says Australia, or few more midwives or doctors would attend a home birth, the community's founder, Neville Cooper, and his sweet wife, that's Gloria. I may talk about that term sweet and why that is important here in this whole section at another time, but we'll just carry on. So Neville Cooper and Gloria had their babies at home. So that practice came out of, this is their own words, right? Practice came out of a lack of midwives and doctors, not out of belief. It was out of circumstance, practicality. I understand that they lived in Queensland, and there's some areas of Queensland that are quite remote where there wouldn't have been hospitals and birth centres. So it seems like they're telling us on this website that it came out of circumstances and practicality. But then it goes on. So having home births, this inspired a young couple in the church at Springbank in 1974 to believe in 1 Timothy 2 verse 15 and have their first baby at home. And this is what really caught me. And I went, huh? I glitched. So this started the modern New Zealand home birth movement, which spread throughout the country and is now an accepted option for mothers. I wonder how factual that is. So the practice of home births for this group arose because of practical circumstances for Neville Cooper and his wife. Then another couple take a biblical scripture, a text, and then they believe that home births are the way to go. And then somehow that started the whole home birth movement in New Zealand. Oh, really? Does anyone else know this? That Neville Cooper and his teaching started the home birth movement in New Zealand, which spread throughout the country and is now an accepted option for mothers. I might come back to that. Here we go. Christian mothers take hold of God's promise that they will be saved in childbearing if they walk in faith, charity, and holiness with sobriety. That is on the Gloriavale website, as you can see right now, right this moment. That is their practice and belief. I do not think it is a coincidence that they have put here, Christian mothers take hold of God's promise that they will be saved in childbirth. Childbearing, actually not just childbirth, but childbearing. So not just giving birth to a child, but being pregnant, the whole process, that's part of it. Because you don't have a childbirth unless you're pregnant. We even know that from the miracle of Mary. She was pregnant. She carried a baby and gave birth to Jesus. Okay. So a woman will be saved in childbirth if they walk in faith, charity, holiness, and sobriety. I'll stop sharing that now. So as you can see, back in the 80s, Neville Cooper looks me in the eye, tells me that my faith is not strong enough. My trust in God is not strong enough. I'm not holy enough to have a natural childbirth. And that is on their website today. that a woman's assurance of salvation is through childbearing, and that she will not need medical intervention or treatment if she is holy, walks in faith, and trusts in the Lord. I know as a Christian, that is not correct. I know as a woman, that is not correct. I know as an educated woman, a clinical psychologist, that is not correct. What Neville Cooper said to me, said personally to me in the 1980s, and what is on their website today is misleading. I will get to it in other videos, but that is one of the reasons why I was so upset about the latest documentary that came out talking about Gloriavale and the misinformation and how dangerous that is, presenting that to people in New Zealand who vulnerable people may be sucked into joining this group that causes harm. That is not just my personal opinion. I'm going to talk about my personal opinion, but I will also, I'm very, very prepared to show you the evidence that this causes harm, and this is the foundation of the harm. And that came directly from Neville Cooper himself, has been passed on and pressed on the current leadership and current women and young women who are residing in Gloriavale today. I'm going to try putting this on YouTube. We'll see how it goes, see if people interact, if they watch. This will be my third attempt today. I had some trouble with the other ones, and I put some other ones on earlier, but for some reason you can see me talking, but you can't hear anything. I certainly couldn't. So I'm going to end this now, and I'll see if I can upload it. So for now, bye, ka kite, and maybe see you again.